Hello, people.
Mine.
You stalking me, Rob? 2 night meetings in a row? You can't be unmuted. There you
How's it
go.
going, Mike? Long time no see.
I know I've missed you. Your hand turned green since the last time I saw you, which is neat.
Yeah, WebEx has this nice holiday themed expressions. It's great.
All right. Love it. Well, we'll probably wait till about 5:35 to get started. So make yourselves comfortable and looking forward here in a bit. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to give it till about 5:35 just to see if we get a few more people in here and then we'll get started. So bear with us and we'll get going in about 5 minutes. We're going to give it just another minute or two to see if anybody else logs in. We'll get started right at 5:35. All right, well, we are right at 5:35, which is about 5 minutes after we said we'd start. So hopefully anybody and everybody that wants to is logged on here, but we certainly won't be turning anyone away. Thank you all for coming out tonight virtually for this meeting about the Urban Center Neighborhood Forum District. This is our second public meeting for this one. My name is Mike King. I'm the Director of Louisville Metro's Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability. A couple other Metro staff that I'll just point out, making this wave, that are on here. Marilyn Harris, who's the Director of Develop Louisville, is on here. Rachel Casey, who's working all the magic behind the scenes. So if anything goes wrong technically, it's her fault. And Joe Haberman and Chris French, who are both with Planning and Design Services, who are the ones that will help us sort of finalize these draft regulations and hopefully get those here adopted here in the not too distant future. So thank you guys for coming out. Kind of format for tonight. I jinxed her when I said any technical difficulties would be her fault. All right, thank you. We're conducting this meeting on WebEx. WebEx is an online platform that Louisville Metro has been using for some time to facilitate these sort of virtual meetings. When you come in, you're automatically put on mute. You're welcome to turn on your camera if you'd like. You don't have to. This meeting is being recorded, and we will post the recording of this meeting to the website probably sometime tomorrow. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can put your request straight into the chat box, which is over off to the side. And our hope is that we're going to run through this presentation. We've got a sort of interactive online tool that we'll be able to use, but we're always willing to listen to folks. So if you have something you would like to say verbally, it'll be in the chat. So thanks for joining us. Just kind of real quick what we're going to do tonight. Very quick overview of sort of how we got to where we are now and the reasoning behind it. Then from there, colleagues at Planning and Design Services helped us draft up some standards for what this new form district could potentially look like. We'll go through those with you all. Like I said, in kind of an interactive exercise. And then we'll talk about next steps and finally any questions or comments that folks might have. Just again, kind of a review. This is part of the larger land development code reform, which Metro Council passed a resolution in the summer of 2020, looking at us doing a very equity-focused approach on updating the land development code to provide better opportunities and a more equitable approach to the regulatory side of our development. So there's two new form districts out there. We're running these processes concurrently as much as we can, but we don't want to slow one down for the other one. So the two new form districts were both identified in Plan 2040, which is the city's comprehensive plan, which sets all the policies for our land use throughout all of our community. Those two new form districts that were identified were Conservation Form District, which is the other one that's working concurrently with this, and the one we're here to talk about tonight, which is the Urban Center Neighborhood Form District. The comprehensive plan gave us some pretty specific sort of metrics for us to use as a baseline for having established these new regulations. And thanks to a lot of input we've received from you already. Let me just go to those. Thank you. Being moody. There you go. Thanks. So there's just kind of these 4 bullet points that are outlined in Plan 2040. And this, like I said, is sort of the baseline, our starting point for where we began with this process. And these are the concepts that we've worked with a lot of community residents, stakeholders, and so on to provide some engagement opportunities to then show us how these could actually go into an opportunity to create these new regulations. It's not going to actually get put into geographical place once these regulations are adopted. This will just be a new tool that neighborhoods or developers or whomever might be able to use, that we hope is going to simplify a little bit of the development process and meet some of the needs that are outlined in Plan 2040. The sort of parameters that were outlined in the comp plan are for it to serve as a transition from downtown to the surrounding neighborhoods and commercial corridors. Right now, we go basically from downtown and we have the same form district almost all the way out to the Watershed Expressway in most cases. So I think through the public process that West Point 2040, a lot of people recognized we need a bit of a transition zone to add some density and some opportunities to better utilize some of our existing infrastructure. It does consist of sort of higher intensity uses, higher density mixed use buildings that can accommodate a multitude of things like retail offices, rent offices, and apartments. So we wanted to have some flexibility. The design side of things will allow multiple different uses to go in. It's intended to go sort of to our grid system, which is on the periphery of our downtown. So that tight network or street with wide sidewalks, street trees, and buildings set close to the sidewalks. And then finally, that it gives us an opportunity to provide development opportunities, hopefully simplified development opportunities. They can prioritize things like pedestrian cycles and transit users. So again, that we can capitalize on the grid system, the infrastructure that we have, as opposed to continuing to build out. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of sort of the process. We started a few months back with an initial sort of engagement and visioning, and that was where we went through the things that were and were not working with some of our film district regulations. We've had an introductory meeting to this, then we had a public meeting, we had a working group meeting. Now we're back for our second public meeting, and we've actually drafted some new regulations that we're going to use you all as a sounding board this evening, as well as some online opportunities and kind of links for those that can't attend tonight. But again, I want to reiterate this because it's really important. This just creates the regulations. This is not going to enact the geographic boundaries of any film district. So that'll be a process subsequent to this. Based on the feedback we get from tonight, if we're pretty close to what we've heard, and everybody's sort of in consensus, and same with as we hear some more engagement over the coming weeks, our hope would be that we can maybe start taking these through an adoption process, probably with one more formalized meeting just to say, hey, here's what we heard, here's where we are. Is everybody good with this? Just to get a little more closer to where we are. But I think we're hopefully getting pretty close to the conclusion. So next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, sort of how we get here, all of this stuff is available if you'd like to go look. If you haven't been able to participate up until this point, if you go to louisvilleky.gov/new forms, louisvilleky.gov/new forms, that's all the information and all the materials and all the results that we've received to date. Again, this started off with sort of a kickoff meeting back in June, where we outlined the process and the opportunities for folks to get engaged in this. We had the public visioning meeting in July over at the main library, had a pretty good turnout for that, with some interactive boards and things like that, and a lot of good conversations with folks. Then we had a working group meeting with folks that said, hey, we would like to specifically be involved in this and really kind of get our roll our sleeves up a little bit more in this process. So we did that. So far, it seems to be a pretty good consensus of what folks are thinking about this, but that's what we're going to go through tonight with you and confirm. We had hoped to be able to get these out sooner than this evening. Unfortunately, it does take some time for us to put all of these together. So like I said, but we're going to do this interactive exercise here in just a moment. We would love to have your participation in that, but we also recognize that some of this stuff is a little bit difficult to digest. So if you want to do the Minty survey tonight, that does not preclude you from going back at another time, and doing another survey after you've had a little bit more time to digest this. Next slide, please. So these are the standards that were developed by Metro staff based on the community input we received, as well as the baseline that we had in Plan 2040, as well as some national best practices. And as I said, we're going to be using this what I think is kind of a good interactive tool. Rachel Casey has just put a direct link in the chat to go to menti.com, MENTI.com. You can do that from your phone, either through the phone browser, or there's an app, or if you just want to open up a separate tab in your internet browser, you can bring that up. You won't need to be on the WebEx because it's going to go through that process on the internet browser, and you'll be able to vote interactively on each of these. So I'll give everybody just a moment to go get logged on. Once you get on there, it's going to request a code. That code is listed right here, but it's 41860159. And the code,
Sorry, Mike. Hang on. Sorry, it was actually listed wrong. It's actually 48160159.
48160159. So apologies for any confusion. I believe it's at the top of each of the slides that we're going to go through. So if you get bumped out or if you're a little bit late getting in here, the code should be at the top of it. Rich Case is going to put the correct code over in the chat as well. But as you can see, the correct one is at the top. So apologies for the typo there. So is there anybody via the chat or anything that has not been able to get into menti.com? Is anybody having issues getting in there? Raise your hand or put something in the chat. I'll give it just another minute or so. It can be a little tedious sometimes if you're not familiar with it. So we'll give it just a minute to see if, try to get everybody in. All right, looks like we got a couple more popping in there. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll move on to the next slide and start the survey. Again, if you don't do the survey in real time right now, this will be posted online at that mobileky.gov/new forms. And it's going to be open for a couple, 3 weeks. So anybody and everybody is welcome to go in there. Or I'm sorry, we're going to keep it open for about 5 weeks. No, I say that out loud. Anybody can go in there. We're going to try and push it out there through a bunch of different channels to get folks to be able to come and take that survey at their own convenience. So it looks like we are probably getting a little close. Last call, anybody? Yes, Becca Truman, the code is in the chat. It's also at the top, and I'll say it out loud. It's 4816-0159. Got a few more people popping in, so maybe we'll give it just a little bit longer. All right, well, like I said, the code will continually be at the top of most every slide on here. Thanks for the thumbs up. I didn't even know you could do emojis like that on here, so well done. So yeah, Rich, Casey, if you wouldn't mind, go to the next slide. So what we're gonna do is basically break down what we're putting together. The first few slides are gonna be the actual regulations. We've tried to simplify it as much as we can, but it really captures sort of the idea and the essence of what we heard from the public and the things that we would be looking to change. We're going to compare the urban center neighborhood, which is the new form district we're talking about tonight, to downtown, which is the form district right next to it, over to traditional marketplace corridor, which is the denser of those form districts that goes out sort of to the Watterson, and look at the differences between those. This stuff can make your head spin. I'm going to try and simplify it as much as I can, but if anybody has any questions for clarification or anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out and say, raise your hand virtually. We can unmute you, throw something in the chat. I see Sean Williams has asked how much longer this meeting will take. Rich Case is correct. It's scheduled until 7 p.m., so we will have a hard stop then. I have a feeling we might be able to get done a little bit before that, but that's what the schedule is telling us for this. All right, so one of the big things we heard as we started talking through this new film district that again is a transition between downtown and some of our more traditional neighborhoods that extend all the way out to the Watterson Expressway is we needed that transition sort of on the edge of downtown to provide a little bit better of a transition. So one of the things that we looked at first is building height. So with the building height, through several conversations and a couple engagement opportunities, we had heard that the minimum building height for the urban center neighborhood should be 3 stories or 40 feet, which is the same minimum as downtown. The traditional marketplace corridor does not have a minimum, so you can build 1 story, even 0 stories in some cases along there. The maximum would be 90 feet or 8 stories. So the lowest a building could be would be 3 stories. The tallest would be 8 stories. And again, that goes back to this opportunity to provide a little bit more density on the edge neighborhoods that can better support things like transit, mixed-use development, these sort of things. When you compare the maximum to downtown, downtown does not have a maximum. Downtown can go as high as it can reach. And then the traditional marketplace has a maximum height of 4 stories. So again, I'll just sort of reiterate the minimum building height in the new form district would be 3 stories with a maximum of 8 stories. And then in terms of an actual required building step back, it really stays in line with what everything else currently is. So downtown has step backs, but only once you start getting over 14 stories at the top. Since we put the maximum of 8 stories here, it doesn't have the step backs. Same with the traditional marketplace corridor, you can get 4 stories there. So if somebody were to apply for a variance or some some waiver of some sort to try and get around this, then we could utilize planning commission staff to look at what the appropriate setbacks would be. But as the regulation, there will not be any required setbacks. So with that, does anybody have any questions before we allow you guys to vote? So in your Mentimeter, it should be open on that question. There's the three options that are all on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being you strongly disagree, 5 being you strongly agree. And we ask that you put a 1 through 5 on each of these with a building height minimum of 3 stories, maximum of 8 stories, and no required building setbacks. Any questions or anything? I see a vote, I think, popping in here. All right, and we'll give it a minute or so for folks to put their answers in here. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so. I see about 18 people that have put in their answers, but again, don't feel obligated. If you'd rather take a little bit of time to digest this and do it in another time, we just wanted to provide this opportunity to walk it through with you. So keep putting your answers in, but I will say this is kind of why we like to use this tool, because it gives us these real-time results without everybody sort of talking over each other and all of those sort of things. So it looks like, based on the feedback, it's not 100% consensus of like, yes, this is spot on, but it does appear that everything tends to trend a little bit more towards the agree side than the disagree side, based on what I'm seeing from these numbers that are being put into it. Would anybody like to elaborate on why they put their answer in or whatever it may be? No obligation if you don't want to, but just an opportunity if anybody would like to share their thoughts a little bit more deeply.
Yes. Hey, I got a question for you, Mike. If you were to answer that the building height maximum of 90 feet, if you were to answer that you strongly disagree with that, does that count in your data as I disagree because it should be lower than that or higher than that, or how is that interpreted?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's why we leave these opportunities to provide sort of descriptives on it. Do you have a preference? Do you think 8 stories is too high or too low?
Well, I think that depending on where it is, that 90
Sure.
feet's too high. And I think that depending on where it is, that the building height minimum of 3 stories could potentially be too high, depending on what's around it.
Sure. Yeah, that's good knowledge to have. So maybe, and when you say what's around it, I'm assuming you're thinking more short of 1 story single family residential. It's in a few spots within the neighborhood, correct?
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I
it's
think
good.
that if you're allowing a place, like if you're right on the corner edges of neighborhoods and you're allowing something with a maximum height, it kind of sets the pace for everything else around it that's new coming in to be
Sure.
approved at that height.
Yeah, and we do have something that talks about infill standards. It's a little bit later on this, which is kind of what you're speaking to. Once that threshold set, then everything has to meet that, and we're still a little bit clear of that regulation that's out there right now.
Okay.
So thanks for that comment. It's great, and something we'll definitely take into account. Anybody else want to elaborate on their answer? See any hands? So we'll head on to the next one. But so this is also a really key part of a lot of conversations we had, and that's your setbacks. When you think of urban neighborhoods, you oftentimes don't want these very large setbacks because it doesn't provide that sort of urban feel that we're hoping to achieve based on the parameters that are outlined in Plan 2040. So when thinking through these with, with any sort of non-residential front yard, the minimum is going to be 0 feet, so people can build up to the property, which is pretty much the way it is right now, but in downtown and the traditional corridor. So that stays the same. In terms of the maximum setback, so the setback's not to exceed 15 feet, provided no less than 60% of the street wall is maintained. So that means like if you have a building, you can step it back, but at least 60% of it is maintained at the same distance. Is that correct, Jeff?
Street wall point that you're mentioning, that
Correct.
just means that you can go back, 15 feet, but you got to maintain that existing street wall, whatever it may be, between 0 feet and 15 feet for at least 60% of the block or lot.
Which is very similar to our downtown, except for a few specific corridors. Whereas the traditional marketplace corridor has a maximum setback of 15 feet. So through the process, we heard people kind of wanted things to be a little bit more up to the street, especially on the non-residential side, because it gives it a little bit more of that urban feel. On the side yards, so those are the side lots, it's 0 feet, except for it would be required 5 feet if adjacent to single family, which is the exact same as it is in the traditional marketplace corridor right now. Downtown has 0, but there's truthfully not a lot of single family downtown, so we manage it off of what the traditional marketplace corridor is now. And then the rear yard, the minimum setback would be 5 feet, which again is the same as the traditional marketplace corridor. Sean Williams, I see you had a question on setback versus step back. I see Rachel Casey put an answer in there. Does that suffice for you, or do you need more clarification? All right, well, we will move on to the voting portion of the program. So back on to the Minty side. Same thing as last time, scale 1 to 5, 1 being you strongly disagree, 5 being that you strongly agree. Because since you put your answer in for each of these with a front yard minimum setback, if there is no minimum, you can build all the way up to the property line. The maximum setback is 15 feet with those, the 60, maintaining the 60% wall. Side yard is 0 feet unless you're adjacent to single family. Again, we'll give it another minute or so for folks to put their answers in. And my friend behind me is saying that you all can't hear me very well. So if that ever becomes an issue, please go in the chat, raise your hand, whatever, and I will talk loud and clear to the best of my ability. Does that sound better, Rachel Casey? All right, so we're almost up to 20, which is about where we were last time. Same, this is pretty similar, but maybe even trending a little bit more towards the strongly agree side for our setbacks. So it looks like the side yard minimum is the one that's sort of the lowest, but that front yard minimum, having that ability for non-residential to be built all the way up to the property line. Most people look like they're pretty much in agreement with that. Anybody have anything they would like to add verbally or in the chat about their thoughts and their reasoning behind what they put on here?
Yeah, Mike, I have a question.
Yeah, Lisa, what's up?
Somebody applies for it and it does end up being next to a single family or a duplex. Is that when we have the opportunity to maybe ask them to like have a binding element there that they're not that they don't have 8 stories next to a shotgun house?
I'm going to defer to Joe Haberman or Chris Finch on that. They're more the regulatory experts than I am. I think I know the answer, but I'll let them answer just to be safe.
As part of any process where somebody goes from one form to the other, they would have to go through the approval process, and we can put conditions or binding elements on it on a site-by-site basis. I would also note that these are the main standards, so we kind of have to establish what the main standards are. Then we can start talking about transitions that could happen between them, which would be a separate set of standards.
Okay,
So
I
if
thought
you
that
look at-
was the transition. But
Well, it's confusing because this form in and of itself is a transition between downtown and neighboring areas, but there'll still be, with all our forms, we have transition standards between one form to the next. So it slowly blends together as best it can. So that would be the next thing we would look at after we set the regular standards that would apply. And then we can look at what happens on the edge of the form.
okay, because you can imagine it would be kind of every place that it was adjacent to it, it would be kind of custom. You know, if you took a big donut around downtown Louisville, it's all different all the way around there. Okay.
Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. Does that answer your question? And then Betsy, I see you had a question there that Richard Casey responded to, but it was basically why, scroll back up. Why is the side yard limited to single family? Multifamily should have some access to green space. And then the response is the side yard being referenced is not the yard itself, but the distance that the building must be from the side property lines rather than in front of the door. So in those instances where non-residential is being built next to a single family, it has to be step back 5 feet. That doesn't preclude the opportunity to add green space or other things in there. But when it's non-residential, then it has to have that setback. All right, moving onwards. This is another one we heard about. It was lot size. So one of the things we heard, especially from some of our development community, is that it can get a little confusing when you start talking about lot size. So as we had discussions with the public about this, it became pretty apparent that the recommendation is there is no minimum lot size or depth or width on this. That we don't need to develop regulations to mandate how small a lot size can be. In downtown and traditional marketplace corridor, they do have specific standards only triggered by certain mechanisms. So again, that's where that sort of confusion comes in. So we wanted to simplify this as much as we possibly could to encourage some opportunities, especially to utilize some of maybe the more challenging vacant lots that might be out there. We don't want to stymie any opportunities for those. Joe, I'm going to let you talk about the open space ratio differences, if that's okay.
We're just seeing what people think about this idea. So in downtown, obviously you have 0-foot setbacks on all sides. So in theory, you could build out the whole lot. So all an open space ratio would be is it, at least since we don't have these lot sizes on a parcel, some cities have a percentage of land that has to be open. That can, include land that's open within the setback areas that they provide, but this, as it's written, would require them to have at least 20% of the land open. So you wouldn't be able to build on the entirety of the lot without a variance or some type of relief to that requirement. And to the person that asked what SFR stands for, that's a single family residential. So the reason why the urban center doesn't say except for single family residential, because in the policy in Plan 2040, it's intended for mixed use, larger buildings. So we didn't really anticipate this form to be applied to a single family lot. If you're single family, you're probably better suited to remain traditional neighborhood or in some cases, traditional marketplace corridor. Even in downtown, I don't know if we have any or many properties that are formed with a downtown form that are single family residential.
All right, thanks, Joe. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. We'll move on to the responses. Excuse me. But again, if you have questions, we start putting your answers into the Mentimeter. We just left it as the one. So this one's really just about, are the lot size standards appropriately? So saying 5 is strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree, and everything in between.
Joe, would you be able to answer Betsy's question in the chat? Would that open space ratio include like paved parking areas, or would it have to be something that didn't include parking?
Either. That's something we would have to work out. So in some places, the open space is intended to help with stormwater and maintain green and landscape spaces. In other places, it's strictly visual to make sure that you're not building on the entirety of the lot. That's a detail that once we decide on an open space ratio that we would have to figure out. So we're not committed to one or the other.
All right, looks like we are pretty close to our number in there, kind of trending again in the closer to strongly agree than strongly disagree, the mid to high 3 levels. As we finalize these answers, does anybody want to talk a little bit more about why they put what they did? All right, we'll give it another 15 seconds or so to see what all we get in here. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but you guys are welcome to come back and complete the survey at another time if you would like to. All right, so those are sort of the regulatory side of things that we just went to. Some other provisions that have been put out there by planning and design staff. We'll kind of go through each of these. They're a little bit nuanced, but I think they're relatively straightforward. Just as a heads up, after this one, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Rachel Casey, we're not going to do the sliding scale. It'll just be an open comment form to where you can kind of say what your thoughts are on these. Is that correct? So these are other provisions that would also be included as regulations in here. So we'll kind of run through these relatively slowly, and then if anybody has questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So this is not intended to be applied to areas with single-family residential zoning. So if the zoning of an area is for single-family residential, then this probably isn't the appropriate form district for that area. Keeping in mind that the zoning dictates the use and the density of that, whereas the form dictates more of the design and the feel of it. So if it has single-family residential zoning, doesn't make a lot of sense to have this form district applied to it. Surface parking as a principal use would be prohibited. This isn't saying that you can't have surface parking, but it's saying that cannot be, you can't come in and propose if it's within this form district to create a surface parking. Drive-throughs would be prohibited, so no drive-throughs in any of these areas. Parking should be screened and not visible from the street. So again, you could potentially do surface parking to supplement a development, but it would need to be screened from the street. But it's like, can't just be surface parking. Carrie, I think you mentioned earlier, this would not be subject to infill requirements, which what infill requirements basically do is you look at a couple of buildings within a block face and say, here's the height threshold that this has to be in, so it has to meet this. So rather, it would just go back to those regulatory sites that we talked about. So there would be no infill requirements on this. It's the idea is to discourage larger buildings that occupy more than half of a block, so that it gets sort of that mix of architecture as well as these big kind of block face buildings that can be a little daunting and a little intimidating, provides a little bit more character if we design that way. And then also we want to encourage and require a variation in architectural elements and insets. So similar to a few other areas in town that we don't want these blank walls kind of lining our streets. We want some variation and some authenticity to that. Does anybody need any of those clarified? They seem relatively straightforward, but some of us do these a little bit more often. I see Lisa says, discourage seems problematic. Okay, that's a great point, Lisa. So that's something we can look at.
How do you regulate that?
Yep, it's a good point.
Discourage.
Yeah, maybe we need some more specificity on that one.
Putting forward the concept at this point, Lisa, once we all agree that that's something we want to do, we certainly wouldn't write a land development code that stated that exactly, because it would be very difficult to administer. But once we agree that that's something we want to do, there's been a lot of projects where a building takes over almost half the lot or the larger lot. We want larger buildings, but maybe not necessarily a mega building in this particular form. We could start talking about actual regulations that say what that is in a meaningful, measurable way.
On item, I'm gonna call it item 5, but the 5th item, that it's not subject to infill requirements which align setbacks, is that in contrast to what we said a couple slides ago, that we were gonna have people match their setback in the front?
I don't think we intended to say that if that was said
Okay.
earlier. I think this is intended to not force those infill requirements. Is that right, Joe?
So it because of that other regulation, I think it negates the need for infill. And part of infill was when we did form districts as part of, Cornerstone 2020, we applied form districts across the entire county. And there might have been areas where that form district wasn't perfect, but we went ahead and we did all this. We're going to be more clinical in how we apply this form. So I don't know if infill is as necessary. Again, there'll still be protections to make sure we're going to have transition standards. There's going to be reviews where you have the opportunity, unlike when we reformed the entire county, to put binding elements or conditions on particular proposals. So I don't know if it's necessary, because infill requirements really protect the existing condition. We're going ahead in areas that are designated for this particular form. I think we want to change the condition to meet these new standards.
Okay.
Anybody else have any clarifying questions or anything? Rich Casey, you mind to go to the next one? So again, this is sort of, we're leaving this for open comments. If you want to stew on this, like I said, you can kind of complete the survey at any time. But the two questions we sort of have are these standards appropriate? And is there anything missing in here that you think we need to continue to look at as a provision to these regulations that we put out there? So that one's a little deeper of a question. So I'll give it a couple, 3 minutes for folks to think that through. And if you have questions or if you need us to go back to the slides so you can see exactly what those ideas were, I don't know if we can do that.
Hmm.
All right, as you guys continue to put some of your answers in here, I'll kind of talk through this a little bit, and as I read them out loud, if anybody wants to elaborate, please don't hesitate to do so. I saw the first one look like why the ban on drive-throughs. Drive-throughs are really difficult in these, what we're hoping will be a little bit denser urban environments. You inevitably have to have extra curb cuts so that it becomes a little bit more car oriented. It's not approachable as a pedestrian or a transit user, which is what the comprehensive plan laid out pretty clearly at the beginning, saying this is who we need to prioritize. So by removing the options for drive-throughs, it really does help prioritize those. I see some no's and some yeses, which are probably maybe a little confusing because there's the, do you think the suggested provisions for the draft standards are appropriate and is anything missing? So, and again, nobody has to answer, but if you say no, is that the standards are appropriate or is there anything missing?
People are working through it, Mike. I see 2 questions about parking maximums. Why that wasn't noted in this presentation. We are thinking that we'll maintain the maximums that are presented for traditional forms in the code. We could talk through this process if they're appropriate and need to be more restrictive, but we are not, while we're not proposing a parking minimum because that's in the policy and the plan, we are planning on there being some type of parking maximums, which means you can't apply as much parking as you would like. You need to basically justify it if you're going to go over what the limit is.
Yeah, and I see somebody on here, it looks like they're trying to incentivize that. So for density and affordability bonuses, then maybe you could amp up your parking maximums, those sort of things.
I think in one of our planned development districts, there's a parking minimum that they had halved from the previous, standard code. But the people that bought it, they love parking. So I think that they want to, so now they would like to exceed that and get as much parking as they want. So we never really, when we designed it, we really never thought about that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's kind of lesson learned, I think, here, what we're looking at. That I remember even when we got that neighborhood plan and the related zoning approved, the proposal was for 0 parking minimums. But the planning commission thought cutting it in half made a little bit more sense. But we didn't put parking maximums in there. And to your point, I think it's really important to have those parking maximums so you don't get a building that fits the criteria, but then has this massive surface parking lot and everywhere else that takes that out. So with these regulations, you would have to apply for a variance to get around that. Or I guess it'd be a waiver, actually. All right, and I see one on here about a little bit more refinement through some working groups, which is definitely something we can look at. Width of the street is something that kind of came up. I think Joe pointed out that the setback's not dependent on street width or traffic on the street. I think in a lot of ways, we probably need to do a better job of, again, as that Horn District outlines in Plan 2040, we need to prioritize some things over automobiles. So when we start building our built environment, our buildings, and how we design those based on the number of cars or how wide a street is, then we're letting the sort of car-centric thing that probably has been a detriment to a lot of these areas really dictate the design. So I think based on those metrics that were put out there at the beginning through the comp plan, that's why we're looking at this. I think we covered this. I see one on here. Hard to do this without a sort of defined geography. I do agree that mega block development is the antithesis of how the city developed density. These are lower height urban neighborhoods. Context matters, and not to drive through, and no to drive throughs. or a whole lot of garages. So yeah, those are all great points on there, and hopefully we're trying to capture some of this. But as somebody else pointed, we're happy to continue to refine this based on the comments we got, and we'll definitely present this at least one more time to hear sort of what everyone's thinking to make sure we're on the right track with this. All right, so this is where we get a little planning technical, but it's really not. It just kind of comes across that way. But basically, they're what are called in the land development code threshold tables. And what that ultimately means is if a development is coming in and it meets all the criteria, then it is allowed by right. So if it meets all the criteria for the zoning reform district, it's allowed by right, but with these threshold tables, when the development starts to increase a little bit, it adds a certain level of review. And there's really two of these that we come into play. There's the category 2B review, which is just a staff review, internal to planning and design staff, that they would ultimately sign off on. And then a category 3, which would actually go to a public hearing, some subset of the planning commission or the planning commission itself. So what would happen in this area is if it's meeting the design criteria, but if it's the construction of a building or an addition that's less than 3,000 feet, or one that's 3,000 to 5,000 feet, which is, we built this one off of a different form district as well. Any new off-street parking spaces, all of those would check boxes that basically say, all right, now you have to go through this type of to-be review and you have to justify it based on these criteria. And we're gonna make sure that we post these threshold tables out there for everyone to look at. This is one we really just kind of wanted to talk through with you a little bit more because it can be a little bit confusing. So we'll show you what those guys look like. But so again, it's category 2B. If it's construction of a building less than 3,000 square feet, then it has to meet certain criteria. If it's a building or an addition from 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, still a 2B stack review, but it has a little bit more criteria that it has to meet. And same if you're establishing any new on-street parking spaces. Category 3, which is the one that would actually go to a subset of the planning commission. That is if you are building any buildings that are greater than 5 stories in height or greater than 5,000 square feet. So the idea behind that is we don't want to stymie and make it difficult to develop with this new form district. But the sort of more intense and the bigger the building gets, there should be some sort of opportunity for public comment. So that's sort of the threshold tables wrapped up as neatly as I could. Joe and Chris, you guys are way better experts on those. Does that summarize it pretty well, you think? Joe, you're on mute if you're trying to talk. I don't know if you are, but if not, I'll say.
I just mentioned that I think you explained it well. Unless somebody has any questions about the details of it.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll put these specific threshold tables up on the website, louisvilleky.gov/new forms. And you can look at those different criteria as the intensity of the development goes up, what all that would trigger. Does anybody have questions or anything about that? Like I said, that one gets a little bit technical. It's hopefully relatively simple as we talk through it, but it can get a little bit more technical. Yeah, see, Lisa had a question, is that the first floor square footage? And no, that's for the whole building, the square footage of the whole building. So pretty simple question. We got 3 answers on this one. Do you think the review thresholds are appropriate for urban center neighborhood? So based on those criteria that I just went through, that it would require either staff approval or a subset of the planning commission approval. Do you feel that that's appropriate? I'll give you another 30 seconds or so. All right, so it looks like the pretty strong majority feels they are appropriate. There's a few people that say yes, but it probably needs some changes. You're welcome to tell us what you think those changes should be now, or same if you go onto the website now or after this, there's a comment form that you can put it in right there. And same, the folks that think, no, these aren't appropriate for the urban center neighborhood. We'd love to hear your reason behind that to make sure we can get it as close as we possibly can to a consensus on this. So if anybody wants to share a little bit more detail about why they put what they did, we would love to hear from you, whether it be now in the chat or if you want to go online and submit those comments. Any of those would be really helpful. We would appreciate it. All right, we'll give it another 15 seconds or so. I think we've had a couple people pop off, so we're probably not getting as big of a number on our responses. Yeah, looks like we've kind of tapered off here, so we would have gone to the next slide. All right, so that's the end of the Menti side of things. Mentimeter, which was the software you guys just used, we're going to keep that poll open until January 13th. And again, repeat it over and over, louisvilleky.gov/new forms. You can go in there, you can take the Mentimeter poll, you can look at the results that have led up to this point. And additionally, if you just want to have an open comment on there, you can type it in, or we'll have contact information as well, where you guys can call or email us directly if that would be a preference. So our hope is that based on the feedback we get by January 13th, we'll take all of that and we'll start to refine that down. And then I think what we'll inevitably probably do is put that through at least one more round of refinement to make sure we're right on track. It seems like we're relatively close here, I think. There hasn't been a lot of adamant opposition on some of these, but if that is the case, we'd be happy to hear those comments and do what we can to offset it. We'll put that full amendment online as soon as we get it available, late January, probably early February, somewhere around there. And then we'll let everybody that we've interacted with so far, with email addresses and the listserv that we have, we'll send that out to everyone and then figure out our best strategy and how to refine those from there. And then we probably won't start the approval process in February. I'll probably move maybe a little bit back, but we are looking to do it probably, I would say in the first quarter or third of next year would be our goal, I think. Does anybody have any questions about that? My best radio voice, go to louisvilleky.gov/new forms, louisvilleky.gov/new forms, and we will have this meeting, the recording of it posted up there, the Mentimeter poll, all the past results up until now. Additionally, we'll have the opportunity for just online comment if you'd like to put something specific in, or here's Joe and my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have specific questions or if you'd like to talk a little bit more detailed about these specifically. Please just say so. We would love to hear from you. So I think we've wrapped up about 30 minutes beforehand, but I don't want to stymie anyone. If anybody has questions or comments that they would like to discuss, we would love to hear them. Anybody? So yeah, like Joe put over there in the comments, we'll try and get everything posted on here tomorrow. And then we'll shoot an email out to everybody to let them know that, hey, this is available. So please share with anybody and everybody you think might be of interest to it. We greatly appreciate you taking some time out of your evening to come out and help us with this. It's a really important thing, but we have to do it with some community buy-in and some community input. So we really appreciate y'all's opportunity. Don't hesitate to reach out if you guys have any questions or comments or anything like that. And hopefully we will talk to all of you all soon. Have a great night.